Spiritual intelligence. First of all, one needs to say this is not about religious belief. It's not about religion, and it's more. It's something different. It's something that is broader, and in essence, spiritual intelligence, as opposed to spirituality. I'm talking about spiritual intelligence, is the capacity or the thing that underpins all spirituality, spiritual practice, and religions alike. So what it really is a capacity we have to engage with a transpersonal dimension of ourselves, so that we can find an understanding of the world, we can find an inner peace, we can find a balance. Cool. So I love this quote that I came across as I was doing research around spiritual intelligence, and it comes from Stan Grof, who is the founder of holotropic breathwork. In his earlier life, he did a lot of research with LSD and altered states of consciousness. And once that became illegal, he moved on to exploring other things like breathwork. But the quote simply says that spiritual intelligence is the capacity to conduct our lives in a way that reflects deep philosophical and metaphysical understanding of reality and ourselves. So really shifting the focus into something that is broader, bigger than kind of the narrowness of life. It also kind of sits in the context of multiple intelligences. So Howard Gardner is the psychologist who put forward initially the concept of multiple intelligences, and what he's saying, or what he was saying, or what he is saying, is that we don't just have one intelligence. We have a variety of intelligences, which are the way in which we interact with the world. So we have verbal linguistic intelligence, our capacity for verbal skills, to sensitivity to sound and meaning and the rhythm of words. Logical mathematical intelligence, spatial visual intelligence, which by the way is what I worked with when I was doing the research project with the architecture students. We were looking at how do we develop spatial intelligence in students without using without using language, and we did it through dance. Then there's the body intelligence, musical, interpersonal intelligence, which is our capacity to kind of empathize or respond to the moods and motivations of others. Our intrapersonal intelligence, and a naturalistic intelligence, which is about nature, plants, etc. So this talk isn't about these intelligences, so I'm just rushing through them, just to give you a sense that there are these multiple intelligences. So, So this theory with Howard Gardner developed over the years, and one of the last intelligences that he actually included was existential intelligence, and this being our capacity to tackle deep questions about human existence. So moving slightly away from the concept of multiple intelligences, I just want to look at another idea, and that is that we can look at intelligence, or the measurement of intelligence, in three categories. The first is IQ, which we know about, and that was kind of formulated around in the 1900s, and the tests for IQ were created by Alfred Binet at that time. And it is the one that we are most familiar with and the one that we traditionally associate with intelligence. And then a little bit later, much later, sort of like 90 years later, we have this idea emerging of emotional intelligence, or the emotional quotient, which is about feeling. And really, this was created by two researchers, well, not created, but proposed by two researchers, Peter Salovey and John Mayer, and later Dan Goldman wrote this book that I think most of us are familiar with, around emotional intelligence. And that is something that we have seen. And then what we're looking at today is a little bit different, and that is spiritual intelligence, which is a term which is coined by Dana Zohar in a book that she wrote in 1997 called Rewiring the Corporate Brain, and she's done a lot of work in corporate. But so we're talking here about spiritual intelligence, and although Howard Gardner speaks of existential intelligence, they are related. So same thing, different terms. But basically, if we look at these three categories, we see that they're different forms of intelligence. And for us, and for the work that we do, I think they relate to these questions, which I think we have the mind, intelligence, the IQ, what am I thinking? What am I imagining? We have the emotional intelligence, what am I feeling? And then spiritual intelligence, which is asking those existential questions. What am I? Who am I? Now, what's missing here, but I will bring it in later on, is physical intelligence. We'll come back to that. So I want to contextualize this, because I think that as these different intelligences have evolved in terms of our understanding, they begin to reflect an underlying theme of who are we? What is the psyche of the modern human? And so the context here is the Homo sapiens, who we are, but the modern Homo sapiens. It's like, who are we and where do we come from and what is our understanding in this world? So we're doing a little digression, and we're going to look at the axial revolution, the Greeks and us. Just a little bit of joke saying the Greeks and us, being Greek, but anyway. But just to see where does the modern psyche come from? Where is this, our understanding of the world? So the axial age, around 500 to 300 BCE, is basically the birth of the modern era. And at that point, various writers, philosophers emerge that kind of start to put not only philosophy together, but religions together. And so we have, for example, we have the Buddha, we have Confucius, we have Plato, we have various people emerging. This era is the movement or the change from what was the late Bronze era to the beginning of the modern era. So what had happened at this time is that it's almost like the time history begins. It's the time when we move away from the mythic story that we have told about humanity, and we move into the historic times. We are moving from oral traditions and myths and stories to technical language, to writing things down, to writing history, to writing the stories. And we move, or we being the humans, we move on from an age where, it's unquestioned authority, in the sense of like, this is how life is, and nobody examines it and nobody looks at it, to the time of changing and questioning and forming ideas. At this time, the main religions emerge, and we also move our thinking very much from the mythic, the allegorical thinking to the analytically grounded way of thinking. So we really like moving at this time into the modern era. What does that mean? You know, why? Why would one look at this? And so what you would what happened before this time is you had civilizations, and you had extremely sophisticated civilizations, the Egyptians, the Indians, the Chinese, you know, a lot of civilizations. But there were civilizations that that kind of the people were not questioning. You know, for 1,000 years, they did things the same way, more or less. They believed the same things, more or less. It was a continuous cycle of the same. And then with the Axial Revolution, we have this shift and we have this questioning. And I'm going to just now shift to the Greeks, simply because the Greeks were, you know, in terms of Western civilization, they become our foundation. It's also easier to talk about something we're more familiar with. So a number of ideas begin to emerge that make us human. One of these is that man, because at the time was men, are able to overcome nature. In other words, they are beginning to master nature, so to speak, and to begin to question everything. So they're questioning the gods, they're questioning nature. What's nature made of? You know, the atom, ideas, politics, everything is being questioned, everything is being examined. And in terms of architecture, this what I put on the screen typifies this attitude. So on you know, on the one side, we have this magnificent temple, and in terms of the architecture of the Greeks, it's like, we will carve the stone, we will create these columns structurally, we will, you know, we'll take stone and make it do what we want it to do at one level, and we are going to place this beautiful object, which is civilized and which is, you know, culture, in the landscape, preferably on top of the hill, just to make the point, you know, here I am, I'm here. And contrast this just a little bit to the one side, which is a Mycenaean tomb, which has got quite, which, you know, architecturally also is quite sophisticated. It's not dumb architecture, but look at the approach. It's kind of like in the landscape, in the mountain. It's kind of not sitting on top. And I know it's a tomb and a temple, so it's a little bit unfair to compare, you know, these two, but basically it is, they are basically typical of the approach. And we see this right across the world. But seeing as though this is not a history of architecture talk, we'll move on. So the Greeks, then in terms of mastering nature and overcoming nature, we suddenly look and we realize that there's a natural side of us that also needs to be tamed. You know, so the natural instincts need to be tamed and they need to be overcome. And this becomes typified in the way, you know, we have the Greek gods here of Apollo and Dionysius, the one being about culture, civilization, the other one being more of the natural instinct. So strangely enough, they do coexist. even though there is this attitude for taming instincts, they don't go away completely. And we have Dionysian rites and, of course, Dionysian worship and all sorts of things happening. But in a way, they become a pressure valve outlet to society in this time. So we have Apollo, and he's, the god of many things, but, there's architecture and theater and music and everything's on the left. We have this very sort of civilized way of, the theater. And then on the right, we have the Dionysian and the Dionysian rituals and things that are happening, which are wild and a little bit crazy. But, in terms of dance, I mean, this is like a whole discussion in itself, but in terms of how we look at it in dance at this moment, we'll see that on the left, intellect, culture, control, we have dance that's formalized. So the theater is formalized. We have the dancers and the chorus and everybody in the theater, hopefully trained and whatever. It's choreographed. So, they're playwrights, they're choreographers. And the experience of dance comes from an external locus. In other words, somebody out there will tell me how to dance. The choreographer tells me how to dance. So it's not, it becomes quite intellectual in a way. Versus on the other side, the Dionysian, I say spontaneous dance, although, the rituals are structured or they kind of set up, but it is spontaneous in the sense that the movements, the dance just comes from a spontaneous place. It's expressive, it's kind of this wildness. And in that sense, it becomes an internal locus. It says that this dance comes from me. It's an expression of me. I'm the person who creates this dance. So in these two gods, we have these two sides of dance. Going back to the axial revolution, we see that time is now conceived in a different way. So before we had circular time. So as I said before, take the Egyptian civilization or these other civilizations, there were a constant cycle that went on and on and on the same way. And in a way, kind of what that means is that I'm forever sitting within a paradigm where I can be part of this kind of eternal cycle. And if I get it wrong now, well, I can have another chance. If I don't, because the seasons come and the seasons go, and be part of this eternal cycle. With the axial revolution, we get the shift to a linear time. So now time has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end, and it's sequential. And if you do something now, well, that's it. You really messed up because it's kind of, this moment has come and it's gone. So what this means is that in the circular time, we are connected to nature, we're connected to natural cycles. Events repeat themselves, so they're part of an eternal cycle. I have a second chance. Whereas in the linear paradigm, chronological, in one direction, never repeats. We can save time, we use time, or we waste time. And we can never return to fix it, our problems. This idea then translates spatially. And although the ancients didn't have pictures of the universe, we have here two models of the universe. The one based very much on a closed system. It's this eternal eternal universe, no beginning, no end. Whereas the one on the right is Big Bang, time starts, universe starts, sequence of events, and life happens. There's a beginning to the story. As I said, there's a middle and there's an end. And what this means is that in our heads, we have this idea that the universe is teleological. Teleological means that it leads to an end, it leads to a goal, it leads to something. So we hear, we hear this sometimes when people talk about how the universe is expanding and one day it's going to contract. That's also disputed, but anyway, that's going to contract and it's going to end. So it's something moving towards an end. And what that means is that our life becomes teleological. So anyway, just as a quick aside about the universe, as I said, there's various theories now, so it's not purely as simple as that. And if you want, you can jump onto YouTube and you can watch lots and lots of interesting talks. But in a way, there is the shift to the subatomic and a worldview which is moving a little bit away from the physical paradigm to one that's based on information. So a lot of the scientists are now telling us that the consciousness and the universe is information, and it's information manifest. But I'm not going to go into that now. And it's really fascinating and interesting to go even into that aspect of this. So Plato, always Plato, he separates the worlds now as well. He divides the world into the world of the physical senses, and then he tells us there's this amazing ideal world of reason, of form, where everything that's perfect exists. This idea of this divided world finds itself then going into the separation of worlds, which we see in religion as well. So the physical world down here on this plane is the world of the senses, and it's the world of becoming. I'm here to become something. I'm born, I'm going to be great, and then I'm going to die, and then I'm going elsewhere. And elsewhere is the metaphysical world, the ideal form of being. As I said, these concepts become this relate to this teleological aspect, which means that always then my life becomes a life that's teleological. I'm at this point here, and depending on whether you are religious or whether you have some psychological perspective or whatever, over here is not great. And so I need a purpose to get over there. And over there is the goal, and over there is where things are right, where things are sorted out, where things are healed. I have a really, I know, a very, very irrational, I think, aversion to people who say, we're here to learn. I hate it. I really hate that concept. Or we're here to heal, we're here to learn. I think it's true at some level, but at some level it just pulls us into this paradigm which says, I'm not okay now and I need to be okay at some time in the future. So here we are, we're striving towards the ideal world of heaven, of nirvana, of paradise, or whatever we want to think. So in this concept, and this is where, one of the problems of where we are at the moment is that life is elsewhere. Here is not good enough. Where I am, I'm not good enough. I'm elsewhere. I need to be fixed. I need to be healed. I need to learn. I need to change. So we strive. And that leads then to the idea of self, like me. Okay, here I am, this person, and what happens is that this, generally speaking, this idea of self is composed of constituent parts. We have a history, we have a body, we have attitudes, we have a personality, we have traits, we have behavior, we have abilities, we have all sorts of component parts. We have an emotional part and we have a intellectual part, but basically we tend to see ourselves as being made up of these parts. And if I want to fix me, which is where I have the problem anyway, is that very often is, well, I will take this piece of me and I will fix it. So we then get different approaches to psychology that look after the different parts. You know, we get cognitive psychology and we get behavioral psychology and we get transpersonal. We get different psychologies which look at different parts, and we're going to heal them and we're going to fix them, and then it's going to be okay. We'll put all the pieces back together and then I will be fine. All of this really is can be summed up in the idea of dualism, which, you know, is the separation we have of me from consciousness, of me from the universe, of me from everything, but also within myself, that I have a mind and it's something, and I have emotions and that's something, and I have a body and that's something. I've called this dualisms and threeisms because there's three and more, you know, there's more. But basically that, you know, I'm thinking and I'm feeling and I'm doing, but these kind of are three separate, these are three separate aspects of self. And it then ties back to the intelligences we saw earlier on, except now I've just brought in the physical intelligence. So we have the intellectual intelligence, emotional intelligence, and the physical intelligence. And traditionally in the past, and to a greater degree, still there's a value that's put to these. So, you know, if you are pursuing intellectual intelligence, great, let's give you a prize at school, let's make you CEO, this is wonderful, and you know, you just like a great thinker and whatever, you know, you have a great mind and this is brilliant. And whereas, you know, if you are looking after the body, it's like kind of like, you know, are you a pervert or something? You know, what are you what are you focusing on the body for? So, and then of course we have the whole gender, the gender stereotyping between, you know, the mind of, you know, men are rational and then women are emotional, etc., etc. So we have this separation going on here in terms of intelligences and in terms of who I am. So in summary, this is the problem statement, so to speak, for why we're looking at the spiritual intelligence. So we are separation from nature. Okay, we're not really separate from nature. If we were separate from nature, then we wouldn't have things like climate change and pollution and everything. So we are very connected to nature. And I thought there's you know, a very simple idea of thinking of our connection to nature and our oneness to nature is that, well, for ever and ever we breathe the air around us. Try separate yourself from the air, or try separate yourself from food or water. The other thing here is that nature needs to be overcome. And here we read the body and instincts and, you know, like the drives and everything. That's the other problem. And the other one is that we have life is a journey. You know, I have to go on this journey. I have to fix myself. I'm not good enough here. I have to get to the ideal. And so we move to the ideal state, which is always elsewhere. Okay, this is quite important. It's never here. It's never in me here now. It's always somewhere else, another state of being. And the other thing is that I'm composed of many parts, some more equal than others. So where do we focus in all of this? Where do we focus? Some time ago, I went to a talk, quite a few years ago, to John DiMartini in Santon. And I was sitting there and he was like, going on there as only Americans can do with, their little sound bites. And I thought like, is all of this just about making money? Is all of this just about, in inverted commas, abundance and, yachts and holidays and whatever else, they're trying to sell us? I mean, that just didn't make sense. It's kind of, this is all materialistic stuff. And then you think like, this isn't making sense. So I just thought that going forward is to see that, ask the question, where's the focus? What am I going to be focusing on? And to know that whatever we focus on, that expands. So what I love this, it's a Robin Sharma quote, and says, what you dwell upon determines your destiny going forward. So where is our focus? And I thought in the terms of, self-discovery and development and whatever it is that we're looking at, that we have a whole lot of aspects like we've seen before. I said to you, with the many parts. And this is how people start to work. They might work on perceptions, or they might be working on behaviors. And at the core is what drives us. And that, if you go down to the core, we're going from the the conscious, the outside, right down to things that are not conscious. So life happens on the surface. So everything that we're thinking and we're doing and we're feeling and our stories are happening at the surface. But what happens at the core and of our being, the core of our being? And this is a picture of Earth, because I love this, because you see this tiny, thin layer of the Earth, which holds all of life, all of history, everything that's ever happened and will happen is happening here. I think the deepest we've gone into this is with mining, and I think South Africa still holds the record for the deepest mine. And I think at the moment it's, around 4 kilometers, I'm not sure. But, that's as far as we've gone. What lies beyond? And I like to think of this as us, life is happening out here, and I'm thinking, I'm doing, and I'm anguishing, and I'm happy, and I'm, everything is, the whole story is here. Zorba the Greek says the full catastrophe is here. But what is going on underneath? And that is where suddenly we switch from the focus of life outside, life on the surface, to life at the core. And we start to look for meaning. And this is a quote from Viktor Frankl. Those of you, I'm sure most of you know, he was in a concentration camp, and then came out, and he wrote a book, Man's Search for Meaning, and he's an amazing story. You just have to go and research and look him up. So I love what he says. He says that man's search for meaning is the primary motivation in his life, and not a secondary rationalization of instinctual drives. In other words, it's not kind of like we take care of everything else, and then we can go off searching for meaning or kind of create meaning in life. Let's take care of everything. That's this very teleological approach to life. Let's sort everything out before we get to we get to the good stuff. So I love when he says here, without naming them, he says some authors are content that meaning and values are nothing but defense mechanisms, and you can see who he's referring to, the early psychologists. And he says, for myself, I would not be willing to live merely for the sake of my defense mechanisms. Is it really about just sorting out the story and the life on the surface? And he says, man, however, is able to live and even to die for the sake of his ideals and values, something that happens at the core. And this is where spiritual intelligence now steps in. So the search for meaning is tied into spiritual intelligence, and we are looking for a deeper understanding of life through the unification of life, through bringing it together into a oneness, not dualism and separation. And we shift the focus. So we shifted to an existential development and healing. So instead of a journey, can we find alternative meaning? Instead of life's this journey. Oh, there's a lovely YouTube video which popped up recently on WhatsApp group, but I've seen before, which is by Alan Watts. It says, life is not a journey. Alan Watts, lovely, fantastic philosopher. Instead of dualism, can we find wholeness? Can we find something that's integrated? Instead of the separation, can we find oneness? And instead of being absent, can we find presentness? I think each one of these is a whole talk in itself. So if we look at spiritual intelligence, the other intelligences, so to speak, don't go away. There's still the emotional, there's the intellectual, the intelligence, and the physical. They're important, they're there. The story is always important, but spiritual intelligence is something that unifies, and it becomes the foundation, the bedrock, or the core, to use that metaphor of it. So this kind of, if you look at it from a neurological perspective, so intelligence quotient, so the way we use our brain in that paradigm is through serial neural networks. In other words, it's very much like a computer with an on-off switch. So it's kind of follows rules, and there's logic to it, and it's all rational, and it's step by step. So it's like, put your finger on the hot plate. Is it hot? Yes. Take finger off. It's like a serial. It happens very quickly, okay? But that's a very logical serial way of thinking. Of operation of the brain. The emotional is different, and this what the brain does for the emotion is that it forms neural bundles. These are quite sometimes quite random, but there are groups of neurons that come together, and they start to recognize patterns, and they start to build habitual ways of behaving. And then spiritual intelligence is a unifying process, in other words, of the brain. So a unifying process is when the brain takes experience, or all experiences, and starts to bring them together and to make sense of them. Okay, so the author to read there, sorry, I've got here. The author to read here is an Austrian neurologist called Wolf Singer. Talks about the unifying processes of the brain. So there it is. I've got it on the slide. Wolf Singer. So you take the chaos, or you take the parts, and you start to bind them together, and you start to make sense of the world. This is how we create meaning. So the unifying process is a cognitive operation which creates awareness, and it's a higher order of thinking that starts to correspond to the way we are conscious and we are aware in the world. So that the unifying process, or no, not the unifying process, the unifying process and the idea of a integrated, unified brain is very strong in states of altered consciousness. So it's very similar. So ASCs and trance create this integrated, unified brain, and we can get there in different ways. We can get through meditation, we can get through psychedelics, drumming, daydreaming, and a whole lot more ways. And of course, dance, which is really what we are interested in more than anything else. So accessing spiritual intelligence implies moving out of ordinary states of being, which are dominated either by intellectual or emotional intelligences, into somewhat non-ordinary states of being. So we alter our state of consciousness to go into the spiritual intelligence domain, so to speak. We have a problem, Houston, as they say, and that is that a lot of people are afraid of altered states of consciousness. So there are a whole lot of reasons we saw before around the body and about the values we place on different intelligences. But when we start to talk of altered states of consciousness, there's a lot of fear that keeps people frozen or away from that. So, these are basically because the way in the West that we've been brought up, we haven't been brought up, to recognize and value these altered states of consciousness. And what we do is we associate it with instability, and it's the unknown, etc., etc. Or it's taboo. So the only people who go into altered states of consciousness are the hippies, or maybe somebody who has a psychotic disorder, or maybe somebody taking drugs, or okay, we'll even allow the indigenous people that their altered states of consciousness. Where are we? Oops, I've lost my arrows. There we go. Okay, so yeah, so what we're looking at here is a little bit a fear of the loss of ego and of identity. Remember, when we spoke earlier on about the self and how we create identity, it comes in parts. I have a gender, and then I have a religion, and then I have age, and then I have a this, and then I have a that, and all of this is important. And if I tamper or unsettle any one of these parts, then this whole identity is kind of in danger. But I love this. The death of the ego will be the beginning of your real life. And in a way, that's also why people sometimes come to class, they come to dance, they have an experience which in a way, by definition, the dance is an altered state of consciousness or experience. They have it, and then they go, oh my goodness, this is terrible, and they go off and they never come back, either through fear or they've made a judgment or whatever. And this is one of the reasons. So basically, in summing up, we're looking at spiritual intelligence as a whole brain experience. And then here's another view that the IQ is left brain and the EQ is right brain, but the SQ is the whole brain. And what happens in altered states of consciousness, whether it's dance, drumming, psychedelics, or whatever, is that we have this unifying effect through brainwave synchronization. that the brain waves right from the limbic system through to the prefrontal cortex start to synchronize, especially if you're taking LSD or something like that. It goes woof straight away. But it happens through entrainment. So in terms of dance, for example, the motor centers and the auditory centers are very, very closely linked. So that's why when we hear rhythm in music, especially, without even thinking it, sometimes we're tapping our toes and we start to move because the two are synchronized. But basically, it's integration. And what we're looking at then is, in a way, all these centers, we are, in a way, looking at a mind, body, heart integration. So these become ways of knowing. So thinking is a way of knowing something, feeling is a way of knowing something, sensing is a way of knowing something, intuiting is a way of knowing something. But the three brain centers that relate to thinking, feeling, and sensing become integrated. And this becomes a process. And in terms of dance, we combine all of this. So we take the thinking component of knowing, and in the dance situation, in conscious dance situation, sorry, be specific, something like Biodanza or other forms, we have intention. There's always an intention, and that comes from the intellect, and that is set out. And in other talks I've spoken about this, and my definition of conscious dance is dance that has intention and attention. So, those two factors make it conscious dance. Otherwise, it's free dance or something else. Then we have the music, which evokes the feeling and brings in the emotion. We have the physical, which is the sensing through the movement. And this all leads down to dance. So we have, in the middle of all of this, a transcendent zone. So we have sensation, we have intuition, we have feeling, we have thinking. And in the middle, when you bring all of these together, we have a transcendent zone where we go into pure experience of being and altered states of consciousness. By the way, altered states of consciousness doesn't mean, you're tripping off your head. It could just be a very light change of mind, mood. It's, but what we're doing in the dance and what we're trying to do is to move into these transcendent states. And we are seeking to recreate peak experiences, even if they're not major peak experiences. We're looking at those moments that look like peak experiences. They moments of transcendence. They're moments when we connect with joy, when we connect with ecstasy, elation, awe, and whatever happens there is memory lasting. It's sort of, it becomes embodied. It sits in the body and becomes part of our experience. And these peak experiences are timeless and spaceless and formless, which means that in a way they translate to being to presence. I don't like to say present moment because that's just another aspect of linear time, but presentness or presence in a timeless way. And spaceless, which is oneness. When I'm feeling oneness with everything in the universe, then there is no space. I'm not here, there, I'm everywhere. And integration, so everything becomes integrated. So dance, let's finish off a little bit with dance. And in this talk, so we've looked at the problem a little bit. We've looked at the idea that the modern psyche is about separation. It's about dominating nature. It's about separating ourselves from nature and therefore parts of ourselves, and that we are going on this journey to get elsewhere. and that an alternative is to begin to create meaning, to look at the core, and to start unifying our experience through presence, wholeness, oneness, etc. And we do it through dance. And so dance is good for creating meaning, because it's usually, and I'm not talking about formalized performance here like the ballets and things. The dance doesn't stand for something else. When we're dancing, really it is about just the dance, and we create new meaning through the dance. So when we are dancing, we are feeling, we intuition, we knowing, and it becomes that internal locus that I mentioned earlier on, that Dionysian, remember that internal locus of expression, of spontaneity versus an external locus of thinking and language and belief, okay, and choreography. The dance creates its own experience. So when we enter the dance, we don't enter the dance with a goal. We enter the dance to dance, okay? And in that moment, we are in the experience. And the dance creates its own experience. It creates its own spatial temporal feeling world in which we are inhabiting in that moment. And in that moment, because we have left our ordinary state of being or life and entered into this world of dance, this in inverted commas altered state, which is why I say by definition dance is altered state, we are free to explore and to feel and to create new meaning. Okay, so I don't think that there's anybody who's gone into dance to solve a maths problem, or gone into dance because they want to write an essay, or gone into dance because, you know, the dance is going to give them the answer. We go in there with a different experience, which is an experiential experience, creating something different. And the dance, therefore, is going to shift our consciousness. The minute we start dancing, the first step, the first note of music, there's a shift of consciousness. And we go from the mind, the conceptual, to the thinking, into the visceral, the body. So we go from the mind to the body. And what that does is then it starts to present the parameters through which spiritual intelligence can be developed. Okay, so spiritual development, intelligence, creating meaning, and looking at the world in a different way. The first one is the presentness. When I'm dancing, I'm present. If this woman here was not present and this man holding her, then there would be a real problem. So we are directly connected to the experience in the moment. It brings us into presence, and we transcend all time, linear, circular, whatever you want to call it, into a timelessness. So the time of the dance, especially if you really give yourself over to the dance, you can most probably have an entire dance and the music stops and you go like, oh, is it over? What happened? You know, time just disappeared. Many years ago, I did Marcus Stuck did some measurements on me in the pool. And one of the things that he measured was the perception of time. So like going into the pool and then coming out, and I said, oh, I've been inside there for, you know, I don't know what I said to him. And one day, you know, one time it was like, oh, I've just gone in and out. Another time I've been in there for hours. And then you'd go like, you know, 15 minutes. And I go, really? You know, so the idea that we go into Kairos time. So presentness, what happens when we are present is that we become aware in the moment what is appropriate, okay, in this moment. Okay, so we bypass the invariant and habits. Don't think I've got time to go into that too much now, and I have spoken about it in other talks if you want to go and have a look. We interrupt the emotional hijack machine of the amygdala, and we become aware of the here now. So the emotional hijack very quickly is that very often we respond to situations and act from an emotional perspective because it is the first thing that triggers when we when we encounter an event. And so when we have a habit and a habitual way of doing things and an emotional attachment to the way of doing things, then the whole system gets hijacked. But in the dance, we can say, I'm here now, what does it need? So I start to train myself to be responding and interacting to what is here now, rather than the past, the future, or something else. And through the process of dance, then I enter into this wholeness, this integration. I have the body and the mind and the feeling, the verbal, the non-verbal, the conscious, subconscious, everything is brought into the dance and becomes integrated. Don't have time to discuss that, but I have in another talk now. And so we access the numinous, and we start to integrate the parts of us, of our being, of life, into a deeper knowledge of self, so that we work with the whole. And so we dance down to the core. I was going to say we drill down to the core because that's the standard phrase. No, we dance down to the core. So we use the dance to get to the core, which is subconscious. We can't think our way into these spaces. We can't think our way into feeling oneness. We can't sit here and say, oh, I think I'm going to go and put on a cup of tea and then I'm going to experience oneness. Or I think I'll have some chocolate and I'll be present. Or no. These things happen non-verbally, subconsciously, and we use the dance as the mechanism to get there, to develop the spiritual intelligence and to use it to create meaning. So why the spiritual intelligence then is that by understanding the core, understanding what drives and motivates us, means we have mastery over our actions and reactions to things. We come from a different place of knowing, and a different place and a different perspective. We can become purpose-driven. We can become we can find purpose to life. We become aware of our values and what drives us, and we can then understand the interconnectedness of all life. And that, I think, thank you, is the end.